Welcome to the Happiness Summit panel on building resilience. My name is James Pawelski, and I'm a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, where I direct the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program and the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project. Every person who has ever pursued happiness has encountered significant and ongoing obstacles. As the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow put it, into each life, some rain must fall. No one gets to live their life without rainy days, and even stormy ones. But how we respond to the adversity in our lives makes a huge difference. Do we allow the rain to flood our souls with despair? Or do we find a way to use the water it brings to grow and perhaps to flourish? Resilience is a key to surviving and even thriving in adverse circumstances. But how do we build resilience? Are there specific skills we can learn and practice to cultivate resilience in our lives? Here to discuss specific strategies for building resilience based on scientific research are three experts who have devoted their lives to studying resilience and helping people develop it. I'd like to begin with Dr. Dilip Jastay, a dean and distinguished professor of psychiatry and neurosciences at the University of California, San Diego. Welcome, Dilip.
Thank you.
In 2012, you became president of the American Psychiatric Association. You took as the theme of your presidency, positive psychiatry, and you subsequently edited a volume with that title. But isn't that an oxymoron? What is positive psychiatry?
Thank you, James. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this session for inviting me. It's really a pleasure. Positive psychiatry was inspired by positive psychology. And as we all know, Marty Seligman is the father of modern positive psychology. And James, your own work on eudaimonic well-being and flourishing contributed importantly. The thing I admire most is that positive psychology has become a part of the lexicon for common person. Unfortunately, medicine, including psychiatry, have traditionally focused almost exclusively on diseases and disabilities. That is understandable to some extent because people come to us with some diseases, so we need to diagnose and treat them. But as you said, when I became president, I realized that we really need to do more than that. We should not be experts only in mental illnesses. We should also be experts in mental health. And mental health applies to everybody, including people with mental illnesses. So that's the time when we started this positive psychiatry, and Samantha Boardman, who is here, was one of my partners in crime. We published the first paper on positive psychiatry. So we define positive psychiatry as the part of psychiatry that focuses on studying and promoting well-being through enhancement of positive psychosocial traits such as resilience, optimism, compassion, wisdom, social engagement, and so on. And this is something that applies even to people with serious mental illnesses. I study schizophrenia and aging. And we find even in this group, people have resilience, optimism, wisdom. Not only that, but these traits are associated with better health. Not only better mental health, but better physical health, even better biomarkers. For example, one of our studies found that resilience in people with schizophrenia was associated with better metabolic functioning, better fasting blood glucose level, better hemoglobin A1C, and so on. Similarly, positive psychology or psychiatry interventions can have impact on the brain. The white matter integrity increases. So that's the goal of positive psychiatry, is to bring those principles of positive psychology into psychiatry, including the people with serious mental illnesses. And this is the movement that has started. It is taking shape. It has long ways to go, but I'm really delighted that it is moving surely and steadily.
What important work, Dilip. Thank you for your leadership on that. Now, last year, you published another book. You published a book called Wiser, The Scientific Roots of Wisdom, Compassion, and What Makes Us Good. As a philosopher, I was particularly interested in your scientific approach to wisdom. Now, although we don't have time to go into your work fully today, you suggest that we can become wiser faster than people in the past. What do you mean by that? And what is one thing we can do to become wiser faster?
Thank you. Wisdom is a personality trait with specific components. These components include pro-social behaviors like empathy and compassion, self-reflection, emotional regulation, acceptance of diverse perspectives, social advising, and spirituality. Of these, the single most important component is pro-social behavior, things that we do for other people. And that includes empathy and compassion. Empathy means understanding and sharing somebody else's emotions or thoughts. Compassion means acting on it and helping other people. So the most important strategy I would suggest for becoming wiser is to improve our empathy and compassion. And there are different ways of doing that, but there are three things I stress. One is gratitude diary. Second is volunteering. And third is meeting with people who are different. So gratitude diary. Before going to bed, write a couple of things that made you feel grateful because some strangers helped you for no reason. But also write a couple of things that you feel good about yourself because you helped others when you didn't have any selfish motive in that. When we do that regularly, we start the next day thinking about what we are going to write. And so that changes our behavior. That becomes our second nature. And you don't necessarily need to write this. You can talk to somebody about that. That's okay too. The second is volunteering. Let us set aside a few hours a week for helping people who need help, whether it is older people with dementia in nursing home, or if the children with autism spectrum disorder or other disabilities. Let us spend some time, help them, that makes them feel good, and it makes us feel good about ourselves. And thirdly, meeting with people who are different in the color of skin, sex, but also different perspectives and value systems. I think one of the big problems today in our society is polarization. We just don't dislike each other. We hate one another. That must change because it affects our health. And the way to handle that is setting aside times very regularly to meet with people who have different perspectives. Let us understand why their perspectives are different. We don't have to agree with them. We can continue to disagree. But at least by understanding them, we'll have more respect for their perspective. And that will reduce the polarization and make us wiser.
Thank you, Dilip. Those are great and very practical suggestions. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Samantha Boardman, Clinical Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you, James. It's really an honor to be here and part of this Resilience Dream Team.
So, Samantha, your work integrates positive psychology and positive psychiatry. You're a graduate of the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania, and you're a practicing psychiatrist. You wrote, as Dilip mentioned, you've written with him, works on positive psychiatry. And earlier this year, you published a book called Everyday Vitality, Turning Stress into Strength. Now, in your book, you claim that happiness does not come from eliminating all the stresses and worries in our lives, or even just learning to live with them. Your message is that we should cultivate what you call everyday vitality. What do you mean by that?
Well, vitality is not a word I heard in medical school or even in psychiatry residency, but it's really that sense of aliveness and energy that I think is at the very core of well-being and everyday well-being. It's what helps us not just manage the hassles, but also find uplifts in our everyday life. And it's been said that the opposite of depression isn't happiness, it is vitality. So it's not, only can we get rid of what's hard in our lives, how do we enhance this feeling of energy and sort of positive aliveness? And that's really what my book is about.
And Samantha, oftentimes we think about, going to a psychiatrist if you have a major, trauma, something really big from your past or that you're dealing with. And that's, of course, important. But in your work, you talk about the everyday nature of this. So it's not just the big things that drag us down, but it's the small things. And then conversely, it's not just holding out for that life transforming, big thing that comes along once in a grand while, but it's about the everyday things in life, right?
Exactly. And I think sometimes in psychiatry, we'll think, oh, well, if I only had this insight or I kind of figured this out or this understanding. And I think that's insight imperialism. It's actually, how are we connecting with others? How are we participating with others? What are the actions we're actually taking? What is our embodied path to vitality? And I really like to break it down into 3 simple ways to think about cultivating more vitality in your everyday life. And that I think of it as the 3 C's. The first is your connections. How are you connecting meaningfully with others, having positive interactions? You're enhancing your high quality relationships with others. It might be as simple as putting your phone down, giving somebody your full attention, saying, tell me more when someone shares a story. And not even just your loved ones. It could be with colleagues, coworkers, a stranger. The second C is, how are you challenging yourself in a positive way? Are you learning something? You expanding, to echo what Dr. Jeste says? Are you speaking with somebody who maybe doesn't share your point of view? Those moments where you're feeling like you're expanding beyond yourself. And the third C is, how are you contributing to something beyond yourself, that you feel like you're adding value? There's a great deal of emphasis on self-care, but it's actually an other care that is a more reliable source of our well-being. So what are the ways that in every day that you are contributing, connecting, and challenging yourself? And I think those are well springs of vitality, and they can help you build this everyday resilience, not just the big R resilience, which is how we respond to those major life events, but to those little things, those micro stressors, those hassles, and how are we embedding uplifts in our everyday life to counter those hassles and provide a buffer, but also to bolster our mental health.
So Samantha, you use a metaphor in your book connected to eating, right? So we can think about well-being as kind of like, it would be silly, wouldn't it, to say like, all I want in life is just one good meal. And when I have that one fabulous meal, I'm never going to have to eat again. Like, it might generate some good memories, but you're still going to have to eat and keep nutrition in your body. Now, you talk about what you call empty calories, or I love this phrase, cotton candy for the soul. So many of us go about trying to find this vitality in ways that just aren't so helpful. And you recommend scientific, evidence-based ways of actually getting the nutrition that we need for our well-being.
Yes, well, it's sort of junk food that we often turn to. And I think when we're overwhelmed and stressed out in our everyday lives, we'll turn to sometimes unhealthy coping strategies. It's when we cancel our plans with friends, we will skip going to the gym, we will reach for that bucket of ice cream. And so how can we override that? What are the ways we can build into our everyday lives, ways that we can choose vitality enhancing strategies? I think Dr. Milkman might have a lot to say about that as well. But so how do we get rid of this junk food and what I call vampires of vitality? It's having, reaching for your phone, binge watching TV when you feel like a guilty couch potato, because it's often in these effortful activities. And this sounds so counterintuitive. It's when we're engaging in a hobby where we lose sense of time, where we have flow, that we actually have that life enhancing moment in the day. And this creates a buffer and helps us manage the hassles. It's the same with taking that moment to have a conversation with your barista when you're buying your coffee, or speaking to somebody as you're walking, your dog down the street, or having a nice connection with a loved one. It's when we're even picking up that piece of garbage we've seen on the street. And I think with a lot of the emphasis right now on self-care, it's as though you have to change your life radically, or you have to eat, pray, love your way to happiness or everyday resilience, but I'm really interested in these little micro moments in your everyday way that you can not just sort of seek vitality, but cultivate vitality. And it's usually other oriented and it's outer oriented. And there's, a way to think, I think there's so much pressure on all of us right now that we have to find ourselves. And it's actually all, I think, a process. We're all in the process of becoming, and we're all changing constantly. And how can we change in the direction that we'd like to be changing? And I think there are everyday ways to connect, to challenge, and to contribute that we can, sort of at least move in the direction we'd like to be going.
I really like that distinction between finding yourself and becoming yourself. So let's turn to our final expert, Katie Milkman. She is the James G. Deanan Professor and co-founder of the Behavior Change for Good initiative in the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Katie, you've just published a book called How to Change: The Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. In your book, you point out how crucial it is to be aware of the obstacles to change so we can work strategically to overcome them. In particular, you focus on the inner obstacles we all face, things like impulsivity, forgetfulness, laziness, and a tendency to procrastinate. And I must say, I think you know me pretty well. Can you describe one of those obstacles in a little more detail and one way in which your research indicates we can work to overcome it?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I actually want to start with impulsivity, which is probably my biggest problem and one that I think most people can relate to some degree. And that is really driven by our tendency to focus more attention on instant gratification, instant rewards, and less on future long-term rewards. It can help explain why so many of us don't save enough for retirement, why so many of us eat unhealthy foods when we know we should eat healthy ones, or don't exercise and sit on the couch when we realize that's really not the best thing for us to be doing. So it gets in the way of us achieving many of our goals. And I think one of the most fascinating findings of the last several decades in behavioral science is that the key to overcoming this, or a key to overcoming this barrier, is not the one we normally think of. We normally think, most of us think, we should just try to find the most effective way to achieve our goals and push through whatever is difficult and not instantly gratifying, right? So if you don't enjoy going to the gym, just do it. As Nike says, go anyway, push yourself, take the most efficient route to getting in shape, get on the maximally punishing Stairmaster, and you'll be able to make it work. But what research by Ayelet Fishbach of the University of Chicago and Caitlin Woolley of Cornell University shows is actually we do better at persisting and achieving our long-term goals when we focus on finding a path to achieving them that's actually instantly gratifying, that we enjoy in the moment. So if you're thinking about exercise, for instance, a better way to get to your long run goal of being fit would actually be to choose a workout maybe that burns slightly fewer calories per minute, but that you really enjoy, like going to a Zumba class with a friend. And I've done some research on a specific way we can make it fun to achieve our goals. And that is by doing something I call temptation bundling, which is linking something that you love, that you look forward to, a temptation, with something that would otherwise feel like a chore. So the chore is converted into a source of pleasure. So to stick with the exercise domain, I've studied this in that context. You can only let yourself binge watch your favorite TV shows while you're exercising at the gym. And suddenly you may find that you start craving those trips and that time flies while you're there, and you get rid of guilt around watching too many episodes of the Kardashians. But you can do this in other parts of your life too. Save a favorite podcast to listen to while you're doing household chores, and suddenly those chores the time will pass quickly while you're doing them. Or only open your favorite bottle of wine when cooking a fresh meal for your family, or save a treat that you really enjoy eating for when you're hitting the books at the library. I often suggest that one to my students. So that's a tactic that I think can be particularly useful in the face of impulsivity and make life more fun.
I love that. It reminds me of William James's quotation that the great thing in all education is to make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy. So many of us are fighting against ourselves in ways that are just not productive. And what you're suggesting is a a strategic way of collaborating with ourselves. Now, Katie, I think one of the things that you emphasize in your book is that this work is not like an appendectomy. Like if you have appendicitis, you go in, you get your appendix taken out, you are good for the rest of your life. You're fine. But yeah, right. But this is more an ongoing kind of practice. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things that I've seen in the work I've done about behavior change and what it takes is that too often we're looking for sort of the shiny solution that we deploy for a month and that magically carries us forward to change and transform our lives forever after, with just a little bit of investment. And what instead seems to be the case, at least in the work I've done and the work I've read in this topic, is that it's a much longer process, that once we find solutions to those internal barriers that can hold us back from achieving our goals, we need to keep applying them in our lives. So for instance, if you find a way to make exercise fun by temptation bundling for a month, you can't just stop doing it and expect for the rest of your life you'll have a workout habit because now you invested a little time in building one. Instead, what you need to do is keep making it fun to exercise, and then you're going to persist in achieving your goals. And of course, sometimes the barriers to change can shift over time, and then we need to find new solutions that, maybe it used to be that you weren't able to exercise because you hated it, and now life has gotten overcrowded and you have to figure out ways to plan and schedule and remind yourself. So the barriers can change, and we need to have a long-term focus when we're thinking about change rather than a short, quick fix approach.
What a great distinction. And I'm just thinking about the themes that are coming out from what each of you have said. So I'll say, what I've not heard is anyone saying, well, to have happiness, you have to get rid of all bad things in your life. You have to have everything has to be just so. Otherwise, you can't be happy or you can't be resilient. What I have heard is that just doing whatever comes naturally may not be the right way to developing resilience. What I've also heard, though, is that there are specific ways in which we can manage our focus and attention. Oh, one other thing I've not heard is that you just kind of grit and get through it, and just kind of, you can manage it. But rather, it's about being wise about how we direct our efforts in ways that scientific research has indicated that these might be especially fruitful ways of moving forward, and that this is an ongoing, lifelong process that we need to engage in. And maybe finally, that this isn't just about going deep inside and finding happiness within. It's about becoming, it's about connecting, it's about being with others. So as we wrap up, I'm just curious if each one of you would leave us with one thought that you have for all of us as we engage in this ongoing process of building resilience. Dilip, let's start with you.
One thing I would suggest is what I call positive solitude, that we all need to set aside some time when we are by ourselves, use that time to think about what we did in the last several days that made us feel happy versus what made us feel stressed out. We'll find out a certain pattern will emerge. We can find out the things that come in our way and some that help us. Once we think about that, then the next step would be self-improvement. But that would depend on honest, unbiased self-reflection. That is critical, and that can only happen if we devote that time in a way that we understand ourselves and improve ourselves.
Dilip, that's so important, especially these days where we have all of these temptations for not spending quality time. I've got 30 seconds. Let me go and check Instagram, or let me go and check something else. And having that time where we're able to be aware of ourselves, I think, is really, really crucial. Thank you. Samantha, let's turn to you.
I would recommend being deliberate about resilience, and especially being deliberate about seeking delight in your everyday life. And rather than focusing on what's the matter, focusing on what matters. I think when we embody our values and there's overlap between what we care deeply about and our actions, we're much more likely to find that everyday resilience.
Thank you, Samantha. Katie, what would you say?
I think my one piece of advice is to recognize that, of course, there will be some highs and lows in life. And that when you want to make a change in a positive direction, a really big opportunity can come at a fresh start moment. And this is something that I've studied with collaborators, showing that there are these moments that occur with regularity in our lives that make us feel like we have a clean slate or a fresh start or a new beginning. And they can be dates you can think of, like New Year's, but they can be more mundane dates as well, from the start of a new week or a new month to the celebration of a birthday or a holiday that you associate with new beginnings. And when those moments arise, they make us feel dissociated from our past failures and more optimistic about what we can accomplish. And they lead us to pursue our goals with renewed vigor. And so I would say, look for those fresh start moments in your life and try to create them if you need to, when you're in a rut and when you have something big that you want to achieve, so that you can motivate yourself to start moving in that positive direction.
I love that. I love that. Oh, thank you so much, Dilip, Samantha, Katie, for these wonderful perspectives and practical recommendations for actively building resilience, for developing everyday vitality, for getting where we want to go in our lives, and even for becoming wiser. Thanks to the 92nd Street Y for organizing this Happiness Summit, and to everyone who has joined us today. We wish you well as you continue to build resilience in your own life, and in so doing, contribute to better relationships, stronger communities, and a healthier society.